Hello friends, welcome to Address Book ERP module. In this module, we'll implement a very simple address book or contact management module. This module is a part of our ERP system we are going to build in later videos and is accessible in other ERP modules like CRM and supply chain. While working on this app, you will learn some very important implementation like Angular material data table, how to use Angular Reactive Form Builder, and Form Array. We are going to use these fundamentals over and over again in the rest of the ERP modules. We are also going to learn how to write dynamic collection queries to your Firebase and how to control and implement role level security. Now, before we start, let me give you a brief demo of the application we are going to do. All right, so as you can see, I'm logged in as a user who can add, edit, and see the results. But this user cannot delete any record. In later part of this video, I'm going to log in as another user who has the delete privileges as well. So the point is you can define these roles and responsibilities as per the roles, and you can attach those roles to your user. One thing I want to tell, whatever code I'm going to discuss here, I'm going to include to my link to my GitHub repository to this video description so that you can download this entire source code. You don't need to watch the entire series if you're already familiar with the Angular and Firebase framework. All right. One more thing, this is a very basic and community version. You will not find a lot of pro related functionality. And if for all the pro inquiries, please feel free to reach out to me through my channel About Us page. So let's get back to the demo. If you click on the plus button, you can add a new contact record. So here, as you can see, there are the minimum required fields, for example, name and the phone number, and there's an address type. So address type helps you define what kind of contact is this. So that, for example, in CRM, you can find the customer, or if you are working on the supply chain, you can find the vendor type or manufacturer type. Also, you can keep as many addresses as you want. This is the dynamic form array we are going to build in later part of the video. Again, as you can see, there are very basic fields I've included like address type and the full address. If you want, you can add as many fields as you want. For example, if you want to have address line 1, 2, state and city and zip code, etc., you can do that as well. Same thing with email IDs and phone number. But here I have kept the minimum required fields, which you can update later on. But the point is, you can use the form array, a dynamic form array, and you can add as many fields as you want. Same thing, if you click on a record, as you can see in this record, I already have more than one addresses, more than one email IDs. And there's one more functionality, very essential piece of functionality, which we are going to cover in the next video, is how you can attach an image or file or document to a particular record. All right, so this is the functionality we are going to build. And also, as you can see, this user can add, edit, and see the records, but this user cannot delete it. So let me go log in as another user. So let's log out. So this user is an admin. So let me go back and quickly go to the address book results page. Address book. Result. See, this user has the delete privileges, so this particular user can delete any record. All right, so this is the functionality we are going to build again. So this is the fifth part of the ERP series, ERP apps development. So in order to work on this one, you need to go through the previous implementation. So for example, in first part, I have discussed how to quickly set up a local environment, and how you can create a social authentication, how you can create a login in email based system, and how you can create the role based system. So I highly recommend please go through those videos. Otherwise, a lot of code discussed here in this video may not make sense to you. So for example, we are going to start building on this app on fundamental building blocks, which we have already created in the previous videos. So in previous videos, for example, we have set up a system. So we already have a login and authentication system and roles and privileges defined, which are attached to the user settings. So in this video, we are just going to work on one module functionality which sits on top of the existing building blocks. So that's why I highly recommend please go through the previous videos so that now we can, once you learn those basic building blocks, now we can start working on our module implementation. So enough said, let's go directly jump into the code. So let's go to our command prompt window, and here inside your project directory, I want to create a new component, NGGC UI address book. So this address book component will be created under a folder called UI. All right, so let's go back to your app.module.ts, make sure that this address book is included. Next thing I want to do here, let's go to app.routing.module.ts and include this component so that we can create a route. So save, and let's include that route inside our routes array. And I'm going to keep that redirect so that, if the user is not logged in and trying to access this address book, the user should be routed back to the login. Let's call it address book. Save this, and I'm going to do ng serve. Okay, so if you click on this, go back to your application, click on this, nothing happens. So I think I need to go back and fix my header.component.ts because I have not included that router link here. So here inside this button, just say router link equals to address book. Save, and make sure that it compiles well. Now if I go back and click to address book, it should take me to the address book page. See, it works. Okay, so now let's go back to our addressbook.component.html file and addressbook.component.ts file. So just like previous implementation, first thing we want to include a header. So let's go back here, delete everything from the HTML file and include that header. So app header, and then I want to include the three different things: page title, image URL, and the help type. So again, if you watch the previous videos, you will totally understand, we have already built this header component in previous videos, and we are just reusing those components. All right, so after our toolbar, let's go include a mat card, and I'm going to include a router navigation. Again, if you're wondering where it came from, we have already covered that in previous videos. Let's go import those move in and fall in from router animations, include those to our component decorator, animations and host. Now include one more variable, say state. Let's go back to our component.html file here. Here in the mat card, I'm going to include that transition animation here. Now inside this mat card, I want to include a div. So again, my objective is to show different screens. There are 4 different screens: add, edit, search, and result. You can always create different components to do the same thing. One for add, edit, results, and search. But here I'm trying to do everything in one component. So, and it's very easy to do that. So I've created a field called toggle field. So I'm going to create, initially when the component is initialized, the first screen I want to show is the search. So I'm just going to say diff if toggle field equals to search mode. Now later I want to include I want to show the different screens based on this value called toggle field. So for example, so if I'm going to say if the toggle field is equals to edit, show the edit screen. If the toggle field is equals to add, show the add screen. And if the user clicks on the search button, show the results window. So again, the same component file I'm using to show 4 different parts of the screen. Totally depend on your preference. You can always create the different components if you want. So now, for example, in this particular segment, I'm going to include the search form. So let me create a new ng template, and as you can see, if the ng template is of type show add mode, show the add form here. Same thing, I'm going to, and later, inside this template, I will create different buttons so that you can easily toggle the value of this toggle field and switch to the other part of the screen. All right. So, but first time, as you can see, when the user clicks, when this component appears first time, the toggle field is by default equals to search mode. Okay, now let's create this toggle function here. So as you can see, this toggle function, it takes the value filter, and based on the filter, it just flips to the screen it is supposed to show. So this function, whenever from the search page, you want to go to the add page, so just call the toggle function. So that's the objective of this toggle function. All right. So similar to the add mode, we can create other ng templates like edit. And same thing here. Here, objective is I'm going to include all the edit forms inside this ng template. And later, I'm going to include the appropriate buttons to help user move to the other screens, other pages. All right. So one last thing, the results. So ng template and show res mode. All right. So now I think it looks pretty good. We have created the basic building blocks. Now we are going to start working on each component. So let's go focus on the search form. So search form is going to be a very basic, simple form. It's going to be a template driver form. That means I will give it a name, is of type ng form. Inside form element, let's include first thing is the button. Now this button, what is going to do, it will go to the server and get the results. So from this form, so as soon as the user enters some values to the search form, it should go to the server and gets the data. So when I click on this button, it should call the toggle function. So remember, so as soon as I submit my search form, I want to show the result screen. So toggle, and I'm going to pause the res mode. So just to recap, toggle is the function. It takes the filter, and whatever filter it gets, it will switch to that screen. So this dot toggle field equals to result mode, and it will start showing the toggle the result mode screen. The next thing I want to call is the get data. Now what is get data? Get data is what is going to take the search form values, go to the database and get the values from the Firebase database. So as you can see, get data, it takes parameters called form data dot value. So let's go define the method called get data. But before we do that, I want to include a couple of the variables. Error message, data loading. So data loading is again for the showing the progress bar or the spinner. All right, so let's go create a blank method get data which takes the form data. I'm going to define the form data as optional. What does it mean? That sometimes, if I just want to quickly, if I don't submit anything in the search form, so it might be the optional. So here, all I'm going to do is like show the spinner on and then show the spinner off, and just console log the form data value. I'm not writing any database code here for now. So let me just comment everything out here. And later, once we finish the HTML side of it, we'll come back and start updating these functions here. But my idea is to finish off all the HTML side of implementation. So that looks good now. All right, so I'm just going to console log, that's it. So now, let me include, so that's button, there's one more thing. If the user doesn't enter any value, so I don't want this search button to be activated. So all I'm going to say is search form submit button is disabled if there is no value submitted. And there are two values, name and the phone number. So if either of these or both of these values are blank, I will say is don't show this. That means do not activate that search form submit button. All right, let's include one more button for adding a new value. So here I'm going to include a mat icon here, and when the user clicks on this one, all I need to do is switch to the add mode screen. So toggle add mode. All right. Now let's give it some more space, and I want to include one more icon here. Now this is the icon is very similar to the search form. The only difference is I want to quickly call the get data, but without any value. That means show the recent results. So for example, it goes to the Firebase and without any parameter, it says, okay, show me the top 5 or top 10 or top 20 values from the database. So all I'm going to do here, res mode, get data, and this time get data will be blank. Perfect. So now, as you can see, this is the reason when we created this get data method, the form data values were optional. All right, so now let's start including the input fields. That means the search form fields. So the first form field we want to include is the name. So we are giving the options to users to search by the name. And here, as you can see, the name will be disabled if the phone value is not equal to blank. So that means there are two different ways user can search by name or search by phone number. So if the phone number is entered, so I do not want to give that option to the username. Again, it's up to you. If you want to search by both the things like username and phone number, please feel free to do that. All right. So I just include a couple of the error validation for the name field, and similarly, I want to include second field, which is our phone. So input type equals to text and placeholder equals to phone number. All right, so here this is little different. So I want to include the validation here, and the way phone validation works here is the pattern. So again, the same code is disabled if the name value is not equal to blank, and then pattern equals to, let's give it a regex pattern so that user only enters numerical values here, numerical digits. All right, this looks good. Now let's include the same form validation mat error and says if the user doesn't enter a valid phone number, so pattern is not valid, you just say that please enter a valid phone number. All right, I think that looks pretty good. So this is what completes my search form now. Let's take a look at our browser window. The search form shows up. As you can see, the button is disabled if I don't enter a value. The validations are working. and there is an add button. See, if you enter a valid number, the search button is enabled and the name is disabled. All right, this looks good. So that's what we wanted to achieve in our search form. We'll come back to the TypeScript file and implement that get data function later on. But now let's go and work on our rest of the pages. That means the add data form. Add data form is going to be very different than search data form. In this case, we'll use Angular reactive form modules to build this form. The reason we want to build this as a reactive form is we want to have more control on this form. And second, we want to dynamically add and remove extra rows depending on user's requirement. So for example, if you want to add more than one address or more than email IDs or phone numbers, I can use my form array to add or remove those rows. The way to define a form as a reactive form, you just need to just say form group and give it a name, say add data form. And the second thing is, any form field you create inside this form, you have to use the word form control. And before I do that, first thing you have to make sure, go back to your app.module.ts and make sure that reactive form module is been imported and also included inside your imports array. So let's go to your app.module. As you can see, I have already included reactive form module. All right, so that looks good. Before we start working on the form, I want to include a message. Message means once the user clicks on the submit button, instead of showing the form, I want to hide the form, and instead I want to show a message that your data is saved. And let's include a button. So once the user clicks on the submit button, data is saved. I want that user to go back to toggle it back to the search mode. So it's going to see search mode. All right, so that looks good now. Okay, so now I think we can start working on our form. So now the div save changes. So in this case, save changes equals to true, show the data saved message. If the save changes is not equals to true, then show the form. Let's include a mat progress bar or a spinner bar, and then also include an error message. So if there is any error, the user should see the error message. Also the data loading. So data loading, what it does, so as soon as the user clicks on that submit button, is going to call the get data function, and the data loading equals to true. So that means your progress bar will start showing. It's time to create a couple of the buttons. The submit button. So it's going to be a very simple button. Button type equals to submit. All right. Raise button. Give it a color. And this button is going to be disabled if the form is not valid. Now let's give it some space, add one more button for clear. So if the user makes a mistake, he can click on the clear and reset the entire form. That looks good. Okay, so now let's include those mat icons. So if the user is on the add page and quickly wants to go back to the search page, we need to add those material icons and call those toggle methods. Okay, perfect. Click toggle rest mode. So that looks good now. Okay. I feel we are missing one more thing. So when the user clicks on the cached icon, it should also call the get data method. So after the toggle, let's include that get data. Get data. Now it looks good. Okay, so I think now we can start working on our form element. So the first field we want to include is the name. Okay, so it's very similar to the template driven form. The only difference is instead of calling the ng model, for the template, for the reactive form, we have to say form control name equals to name. And the same thing, let's include one more field, phone. And as you notice here, I'm not including a tons of validation here. So when you are working on the reactive form, all the validations you write on the TypeScript file, not on the HTML. I want to include one more file, contact type, and which is actually a select box. That means a drop-down menu. Now let's go back to TypeScript file and fix a couple of the things. So first of all, this is a template. This is a reactive form, and my form name is add data form. So first of all, you have to say add data form equals to form group. Otherwise, it will not recognize this as a reactive form. So the correct way of syntax of doing it is like add data form equals to form group. Now you have to make sure that you import all those form group modules here. So I'm going to import a couple of modules from Angular Forms. Is going to be form builder, form group, form array, and form control comma validators, and you will see one by one like how I'm going to use that. So first make sure you include all of those things. So now see the error is gone. To my add data form equals to form group. Now I'm going to use the form builder to build my form. So make sure that you include in your constructor, just say private underscore fb is of type form builder. All right, so now let's go and ng on init. I want to create this form. So this dot add data form, and I will say this dot underscore fb, which is of type form builder, and then I say group. So I'm using form builder to group all my form elements. My first element is name. See the name field and the phone and contact type. So the first is name, and as you can see, the first value is the initialized value is the blank, and the second it takes an array. So for example, the first value is the initialization value, second is the validator. So in this case I am including, and as you can, if you notice that validator is an array, so you can have more than one validations on a single field. So in this case name, I'm saying there are two validations, minimum length is 2 and it is required. Same thing with phone, I'll say minimum length is 10 and it is supposed to have only the numeric digits. So two different validations are the same field. Now let's go include one more field, contact type, and here I'm just going to keep it simple and say validator required. Now I want to include three more fields here, addresses, and this is an array because as I stated earlier, one user can have multiple addresses and we don't know how many. Same thing with emails and phone numbers. So I'm going to include addresses, emails, and phone numbers as array. And later on, we will give the flexibility to the user to have as many addresses, emails, and phone number as possible. That's why I'm including those as a form array. All right, so let's go back and finish off our one last field, the contact types. So I'm going to include just define an array variable here, say contacts, and I'm going to store all the static values, say personal, customer, manufacturer, vendor, etc. Now let's go and make this contact type as a drop down value here. So mat select form control name equals to contact type. Remember, it should match exactly with the form you have defined in your ng on init. So, and then I'm going to, all of those static values, say personal, customer, manufacturer, all of these things, those are stored into variable. So I'm just going to say, let's see of contacts and then print those C's. So it's going to create a drop down from those values what we have defined inside this array. All right, so that looks good. In this section, we are going to include addresses, phone numbers, and email IDs. There's one thing to note that you don't know how many addresses user is going to put. So instead of taking the entire HTML form, I want to use some kind of a collapsible division layers. So if you look at the material.angular.io, you will see there is something called expansion panel. So I'm going to include that expansion panel, and I'm going to include all of those form arrays inside those expansion panel. So as you can see, I'm just going to borrow this implementation from the material.angular.io, and I'm going to include those inside my application. All right, so first thing, as you define, the way to define the expansion panel, just include a mat accordion, and inside that include the first panel, mat expansion panel, and you need a header. So here I'm going to call addresses, and inside that header, I'm going to include the addresses elements here. Now, please pay attention. This is going to be a form array, and the reason why an array, because you can have as many rows of the addresses as you want. Make sure that this is defined as a form array, and as you can see, addresses, email IDs, and phone numbers, all of those are form arrays. Now let's go back to HTML side, and inside my form array equals to addresses, make sure to include a div. Now what this div is going to do is going to loop over all the rows inside that addresses form array. And then later on, I'm going to include two more buttons, one for adding more rows and other to delete any particular row. All right. Now inside each of these addresses row, I want to include two form elements. One is the address type, and other one is the actual address. So again, you can include as many addresses fields you want. Like, for example, if you want to split your address in address line 1, address line 2, city, state, zip, country, etc. I'm just going to pretend that you need only one field. And as you can see, address type is going to be a drop down box, just like what we did for contacts. So as you can see, add type, and I am going to loop over and create a drop down for the addresses type here. Okay. Perfect. So make sure that we include that full address field. And now let's create two buttons. One for add addresses and other one is for the delete address. So add address and make sure we are going to define those functions later in the TypeScript file, and make sure the form value you pass inside that add form, it matches with the form name. So first let's just say delete, click. If you click on this button, it calls the delete address and you pass the form name. Remember, we are going to have two different forms. One is the add form. Actually, there are three forms: search form, add form, edit form. So your code needs to know which form you're talking about. All right, so that's why I'm passing the add form name and I'm passing the particular row you want to delete. Now let's go create that add button similarly as the delete address. And here I think we just need to call that add address method and pass the form name, right? Because here we are just adding a new row to addresses form array. Now let's go to the TypeScript file and start implementing these two methods here. Okay, so first thing I want to do here, create a method which returns a form array. So I just say address lines and it takes the form name and it addresses that particular component. So component means form array. So addresses, remember that we created that form array and form array name was addresses. Okay, now let's go create those two methods. Add address, it takes parameter, the form name, and all it does, it pushes a new row to addresses form array. Addresses, okay. Cool. And inside that actually what I want to push two fields, address type and full address. Address type and address. Okay, now same as add address, I want to have one more for the deleting. So delete address. Now delete address takes two parameters. One is the form name and other one which particular row you want to delete. So suppose you have three rows and you want to delete row number 1 or row number 2. So you need to have the point index, the particular row number which you want to delete. And it's going to be very simple. Just go to the this.address line and all you need to do, pop that row out. Perfect, that looks good now. Now see, this was the addresses. Now rest of the two fields are very, very easy. Email IDs and phone numbers. See, it's just a replica instead of address. So all you can do, you can copy the entire expansion panel, paste it, and just change the name. Instead of addresses, just call those email IDs. It's very simple. So here, I just copied that whole expansion panel for addresses and I'm going to change the name. And this time addresses become email IDs. And change the form array name. Make sure that in your div ng form, just you are calling that email IDs instead of addresses. Address type becomes email types, and here you say email type. Go to that, okay. And now remember, we'll need 3 extra methods, just like the addresses we'll need for email IDs, which we'll do that later. But let's just finish it off, this implementation. Now this time I'm just going to copy that entire email ID, and now next thing is the phones. So very similar like addresses, email IDs, let's include the phone numbers as well. Phone numbers, okay. Now remember, so 3 functions written for addresses. So all you need to do, copy paste, and instead of addresses, the same methods, you can use it for email IDs and phone numbers. Again, you might argue that you don't need 9 different methods. Please feel free to merge them all in one. That can easily be done. I'm just doing it just because of the clarity and for the demo purpose, so that it's easy for the people who are watching, that how to just for the segregation of duties. Otherwise, there's no way that you cannot combine all of these methods in one. You can easily do that. All right. So just to keep this thing simple, so 3 methods for addresses, 3 for email IDs, and 3 for phone numbers. I think that will complete my form array. I believe one last thing pending. Just like the get data, we need to have a set data method as well. Okay, I think it's not compiling very well. Let's see what there is. So first, let's go create that set data method. Now this, okay, now I see this is the panel open state, as if you look at the error, because I didn't declare that Boolean value here, Boolean variable here. Okay. Now it compiled pretty good. Now let's go back and see if I can add elements to my form. See, so all the collapsible menu, they are working. And let me try adding new rows into my addresses form array. Looks good. And same thing for the email IDs and phone number. So the add is working, delete is working. I want to make sure that phone number. See, the form looks pretty good. So I think most of the things are working. So as you saw, my add functionality is working, search functionality is working. Both of these forms looks good. So now it's time to work on the rest of the two implementation. That means for the edit page and the result page. So edit page is going to be 100%, 99% same as the add form. Because whatever the value you are adding, you want to have the same values in the edit. So I'm just going to copy the entire form and paste it under edit form. And it's 100% same. Now, do not worry about how this value will be populated. We'll come back to this later. But for now, the only difference, as I said, 99% same. The only difference between add form and edit form is there is a one field extra. So before I do that, first let me just change all the name where I have this add data form. Let me change all of those names to edit data form everywhere in the edit, under the edit section. Okay, once again, I want to mention that we are working on the edit part now. We are not working, so please do not go back and make changes to the add data form. That part is already done. So only under the section where is that edit data form, select everything and replace this, change the form name to edit data form. All right, so now let's go and include that one extra field I was talking about. So this for the edit data form, because the form is already saved, you are updating it. So it will have one field extra. I'm just going to say include that input type equals to hidden. And this field is _ID. That means document ID. And it's a very important field. Otherwise, how do you know that you are updating that, updating your form? So let me go back. And just like the add data form, include the one extra form and call it edit data form is of type form group. And the ng on init, copy the entire thing, paste it over again. And this time, this form will be called edit data form. And let's include that extra field what I was talking about, _ID. So edit data form. All right. So let's include that. One more field, copy paste. I don't need that validation here. Okay. It is required. So required, let's keep one validation, and this field is _ID. So this completes my edit data form. And as you will see, this is why when we created those functions for add addresses and delete addresses, if you recall, I intentionally did not pass the actual form name. I kept it as a variable. So that was the reason I did that. So edit is done. Now search is done, add is done, edit is done. Now let's go start working on that result mode. Now result mode, I'm going to use the most popular and very decent way of showing the data is called material data table. So let's go click on that material data table. And as you can see, if you go to their examples, there are tons of different examples. The examples I want to use, it's a very nice looking data table. And the reason I want to use this example because it has the filter, it has the sorting, and it has the pagination, all of them. So I like this particular data table. Again, it's up to you what you want to include, but this is my favorite because it has all the features. So I'm going to include that. Now, again, I'm going to borrow a lot of implementation. Everything is from the Angular material website. So as you can see, I need to include a couple of the imports here. And then I have to include a couple of the standard methods for pagination and filtering. So let's first include those, import those modules. All right. Again, you can find all of this documentation on Angular material.angular.io website. So I'm going to include all of the paginator, sorting, table data source, and everything. Now let's go include a couple of the fields which are required for the data table. Here, I'm just going to first create a blank variable members, which is going to hold the initial value, and let me have a data source is going to be of type mat table data source. Now let's go include the view child. The reason the view child is paginator and sorting, those are view child. See, I'm just going to copy those things from Angular material website and paste it here. So this will help me include the paginator and the sorting. Okay, now the displayed columns. Again, the displayed columns is the number of the fields you want to display in your result window. So address book, remember, it is a very small. I don't want to show all the fields. I just want to show the minimum values. So minimum is like, address type and name and phone number and the ID. So these are the columns I'm going to display it. Now let's go to the ng on init. It's very important to initialize your material data table. It's just with the blank value. You don't need to fetch any data yet, but you have to initialize your data table. And the way to do that is called this.dataSource, and you just say new material data table. You just new it. That means you initialize this on ng on init. Now on the get data, now let's go start working on this functionality. So now there's two more methods for the filtering and the pagination. Now you must have those two methods. What you can do, you can exactly copy those and add those at the end of your TypeScript file. Again, these two functions are going to help you set up your pagination and the sorting and filtering. All right, few more things. Okay, that looks good. I think we are almost done. Yep, it looks good. So now let's go on to HTML site, and here we are going to include our results page. So before we start including our data table, first thing I want to include those material icons so that any user can switch back to the add mode or the search mode. So first thing, let's include those under mat card actions. First icon is add icon, and right next to add icon I want to include another icon which will take user to the search screen. Search and just say toggle past the search mode. All right, so now let's start including actual data table. So the first as you can see, form field is the filter field. So if you go to the implementation from the material.angular.io, just copy paste this text, and actually what it does, it includes a filter condition, a filter input text field to your data table, and which will allow you, so whatever you put in this filter text input is going to filter your material data table results based on this filter. Now next thing you have to include is a table, and as you can see, this table has a property, is called data source. Now this data source property of this material data table, it will actually come from the data source, which will come from the Firebase database. So let me just say mat table, and you can see the data source property is equal to data source. Now this data source, let me show you. If you go to the get data function, you will see I am fetching this data source, which is of type material data source, material table data source, and it will come from the Firebase database. All right. So once you code the TypeScript file, it will make more sense to you. Now inside this table, we have to include the rows, and each row and each column. So each column will represent a field which we want to fetch from the database. So you remember, we want to show name, phone number, and the address type, and the action buttons, which is the ID. So let me just show you. Let's go read their documentation one more time, just to make sure that we are not missing anything. All right, looks good. So first container, let's go to the displayed columns. See, the first is contact type, name, phone number, and the ID. So let's include contact type. So my first column in this table will be a contact type, and as you can see, row.contact type. All right. So now let's copy the same thing and this container, and the second container we want to display name and the phone number. Phone number. Okay, the last container will be very much tricky, because now we are displaying the contact name and phone number and the type, but now what do you want to do it? So either we want to edit that or we want to delete it. So first I'm going to call that action row, and I'm going to include two material icons, and we'll include two different functions. So as you can see, the first icon is edit icon. So if I click on this one, I want to define another function. It's called get doc. Now get doc, it takes the doc ID. That means the ID of that particular document which we are trying to edit. All right, so doc ID. And let's just leave this blank. We'll come back to TypeScript later on. So click, and it says get doc, and let's include that edit material data icon. Now right next to this button, let's include one more material icon for delete. So similar to edit, we want to have a delete doc functionality. And again, the delete doc, it's going to take that row underscore ID. That means the document ID as a parameter here. Okay, and then at last, I think for the paginator settings, so I'm just going to copy this paginator settings from Angular Material Implementation, paste it here. So what it actually does, it sets up the paginator values at the end of your material data table. Perfect, this looks good. So I think this completes my implementation of the HTML file. Let me go back to localhost 4200 and make sure everything compiles well. And at this point, I should be able to at least see the data table. It's not going to fetch any rows from the database, but see, I just want to make sure the sorting is there, filter is there, pagination is there, and there is no error in the web console or the terminal window. So it looks good. Now I think it completes my implementation on the HTML side. Now let's go ahead out to TypeScript file and start coding those TypeScript functions. All right, so let me just collapse everything. Save. Let's go to TypeScript file. So let's review this: get data, set data, get doc. So we are going to implement these functions one by one. First thing we have to do, we have to import the backend service, because backend service is where we have written all the backend service. That means database related code. And let's include that into our constructor as well. So import backend service. And while I'm here, let's include Angular Fire Auth as well. The reason I want Angular Fire Auth as public variable, so that I can access user's UID. And while I'm here, let me include two more variables here, doc ID and user role. So user role is, if in the past video, as you have seen, every user has been assigned a role. Now this role defines that user can read, write, or delete or see a particular menu. So in this case, we are going to initialize that on ng on init, and we are going to say whatever in the backend service, we have the user role, and we are going to subscribe to that user role. And if you pay attention to the HTML side, remember that we have written on the delete button. So this button will only be visible once the user role address book delete is equals to true. So for example, in address book delete equals to false, this button will not even show up. So that's how I'm controlling a user's role level security. So in this case, as I shown you earlier in the demo, that if one user, the delete functionality is disabled, so user will not even see the delete function, delete button here. So okay, and so that similarly you can control the other functionalities as well. So for example, if you do not want a user to edit something, so you can control the same thing. You have to take this piece of the code and implement on the edit button. That's how you show and hide the menu buttons. All right, so let's go start working on the get data. Now get data is very simple. As you can see, first you turn on the spinner or progress bar, this data loading equals to true, and then all you have to do, go to the backend service and call that function get docs. Now get docs takes two parameters, collection name and the form data. So again, form data could be an optional field, because sometimes you just want the last 10 records. So all you need to do, just subscribe to that get doc. Whatever value comes, all you have to check if the value is length is greater than 0. Take your data source and assign that value to the data source. It's very simple. So remember, like that's the data source is a property of the table you are showing in the results window. Okay, same thing with set data, exact same method. Instead of get doc, you have to just use the function called set doc. And set doc, I think it takes more than one more parameter, which is the document ID. All right. So address book, form data, and document ID. Okay. So okay, let's go to the add mode, save changes. Yeah, so save changes is the variable. As soon as the data is saved, I want that save changes to be true, so that user sees the message saying data is saved. Okay, and if there is an error, catch the error and show it to the mat error. A very simple, similar implementation we have done in the past videos. So that's the advantage of writing your function once, and you can just use this over and over again. All right, so let's go to the update data. Same method, just like setDoc or getDoc, but instead of this one, I'm going to use the function say update doc. Okay, so if you remember the edit data form, we have included one extra field, which is called underscore ID. Because once you are using the update data, you need to know the document ID, the document or the record in Firebase what you are updating. Okay. So in this case, that's why, I'm passing that row underscore ID is the document ID. All right. So again, same implementation. If the results come true, you have to just say save changes equals to true, and then turn off the spinner. That's it. If there is any error, show the error. So that completes the update data as well. Now let's go to the get document. Now this is very, very tricky because once you get a document, a record from the Firebase, your responsibility doesn't just end up that catching into the data. So data variable. So once you get the data variable, so let's just say get it. So get doc. Okay, let's go to the edit form. And here, as you can see, all of those. So when you call the get doc, you pass the document ID. So that's how I know what kind of document I'm fetching from the Firebase database. And whatever the results comes, you have to subscribe to that and catch into the variable. Now, once you catch into the variable, because edit data form, remember that's a reactive data form. So here, this is a little bit tricky that you have to recreate that form. And the process to recreate that form is very similar like add data form. So I'm just going to copy that edit data form here, paste it here, and I'm going to call a function called patch value. So let me just copy paste this. See, this is how I'm recreating that form, edit.data form, and all I need to do is patch value. So patch value is going to take the results and apply those to your edit data form. Now patch value works perfect for all the ordinary fields. It doesn't work on the arrays. So let me, so for example, addresses as an array, emails is an array, and phones values is an array. So I have to create a for loop. And what I'm going to do, a very simple implementation for, and I'm going to go to that database, whatever in the results, the number of rows I've got, I'm just going to create a for loop here, and I'm going to push those value one by one inside that addresses array. So it's very simple implementation. Now, same thing I have to do, just copy paste this because we have three different form arrays, addresses, emails, and phones. So I'm just going to copy paste this and just change it to emails and phones. So that's how you recreate that your edit data you recreate a reactive form based on the values which you have received from the Firebase database. All right, everything else is the same. That's the only trickiest part we have to deal with. All right, that looks good. So last function is delete doc. It's going to be very, very simple. Very simple. If that, all you need to do here, I just want to, add one extra confirmation. I want user to ask, to answer this question. Really want to, sometimes people just accidentally click on the delete button and it just delete it. So you don't want to do that. At least give user a second chance to confirm that. If the user confirms, all you have to do, same methods what you have done in get doc, set doc, but here you just say delete doc. So it's going to go to the backend service and delete that particular record. So I think that's pretty much it. There's one error I have to fix, auth state. So because I didn't declare that variable here. Okay, so now I think I do not see any error in my TypeScript file anywhere else. So if I save this, now let's go Firebase. If I just try to implement this, it's not going to do anything because remember I have not set up the Firebase rules here. Now Firebase rules are very, very simple, just like we have already covered this in extensive details in last videos. So please review those videos. And here all I'm going to do, create another function just like isAdmin. I'll create a function called isEmployee and I'll say data.role equals to the employee and then use this function. And here, just like the user settings, I'm going to copy paste this and write a rule for user address book. And inside that address book, very simple, very similar implementation. All I'm going to do, just use that isEmployee method. And just check if the user is signed in and is an employee, then only he can read that. And same thing for read. You can manipulate these rules. Like for example, you want only employee to see everything. You just like say isEmployee and all the rules. So very simple, again, I have covered all of these rules in extensive details in last videos. Please go through these videos if you have any questions or so at this point, I think everything should be good. Don't forget to save it. All right, so now let's go try adding a new address editing, and as you can see, if I click on the get data button, so it's already fetched whatever, because I already have values inside my database, it fetched those values here. So I think it looks pretty good. At this point, we have shown you, I've covered most of the topics. I know I went very fast, but again, I'm going to share all of this source code, and you can find the entire source code linked to the GitHub repository to this video description. So I hope you like it. This is the longest video, and rest of the modules, as I said earlier, this is the module once you implement it, is a very basic functionality, but all in rest of the ERP modules, what we are going to do, we are just going to make use of this existing code, and we are going to use this code over and over again. So all right, so stay tuned, please subscribe and wait for the next videos. Thank you very much.